My boyfriend's mom said I couldn't appreciate their Japanese family values, so I showed her real tradition. You know what's funny about people who gatekeep their own culture? They usually don't know half as much about it as they think they do. My boyfriend Kenji's mother, Akiko, decided from day one that I, blonde, blue-eyed Emma from suburban Ohio, could never truly understand or respect Japanese traditions. She'd smile that tight, practiced smile whenever I bowed, correcting my angle with theatrical sighs. She'd watch me struggle with chopsticks at family dinners, then loudly praise Kenji's ex-girlfriend Yuki for her natural grace with proper utensils. The breaking point came last month during what was supposed to be a peaceful Sunday dinner. I'd spent hours preparing chirashi bowls, carefully arranging the sashimi according to color and texture like I'd learned from YouTube videos. Traditional presentation, seasonal ingredients, even the specific rice preparation that took me 3 failed attempts to master. Akiko took one look at my offering and sniffed. Emma-chan, she said, using the diminutive suffix like a weapon, this is very American interpretation. Japanese food requires understanding that goes deeper than internet videos. It comes from generations of knowledge passed down through blood, through spirit. Not something you can learn from computer screen. Kenji shifted uncomfortably beside me, but said nothing. Again. That's when something cold settled behind my ribs. I'd been studying Japanese culture for 2 years, not just cooking, but history, philosophy, religious practices. I learned more about Shinto purification rituals than most Japanese Americans I knew. But Akiko didn't want to hear about my research or my genuine interest. She wanted me gone. You're right, I said quietly, setting down my chopsticks. There are some traditions that require deeper understanding. The smile that spread across her face was triumphant. Yes. Exactly. I'm glad you finally liked the practice of Oyakoshinju. Her smile froze. Kenji looked confused, but I could see recognition dawning in his father's eyes across the table. Mr. Tanaka, Hiroshi, went very still, his teacup halfway to his lips. Emma, Hiroshi said carefully, that is not appropriate dinner conversation. But I wasn't done. 2 years of condescension, of being made to feel like an intruder in my own relationship, of watching the man I loved refuse to stand up for me, it all came pouring out in the most passive-aggressive way possible. Oh, I thought we were discussing deep cultural traditions, I continued, my voice light and conversational. Oyakoshinju is such a fascinating historical practice. Family suicide pacts, usually involving a parent and child, performed to preserve honor when facing shame or financial ruin. Very traditional. Very Japanese. Akiko's face had gone sheet white. How dare you? Or we could talk about Bushido and seppuku. The ritual disembowelment performed when one has failed in their duties or brought dishonor to their family. I tilted my head, studying her with newfound interest. I've read extensively about the preparation rituals, the purification ceremonies, the specific blade techniques. The silence that followed was deafening. Kenji was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. His mother's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her water glass. That's when I realized I might have gone a little too far. But you know what? I was tired of being the perfect, accommodating girlfriend who took every insult with a smile. Tired of being told I wasn't enough, could never be enough, because of where I was born. Emma, Hiroshi said again, his voice carrying a warning I'd never heard before. I looked around the table at their shocked faces and felt something shift inside me. A door closing, maybe. Or opening. I should go, I said, standing up. Thank you for another lovely family dinner. Kenji followed me to the door, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. What the heck was that about? That, I said, slipping on my shoes, was me showing your mother that I understand Japanese culture better than she thought. You were talking about suicide. Family murder suicide. I turned to face him fully. I was talking about honor, Kenji. About what happens when someone continuously disrespects and humiliates another person. About consequences. Something in my tone must have gotten through to him because he took a step back. Emma, you're scaring me. Good, I said softly. Maybe now you'll understand how I felt every single time I've walked into that house. I drove home in silence, hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Part of me felt sick about what I'd just done, threatening suicide was never okay, even indirectly. But another part of me felt liberated. For once, Akiko had been the one left speechless. For once, I'd been the one with power in that room. I didn't hear from Kenji for 3 days. When he finally called, his voice was strained. We need to talk. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Good. My mother thinks you're dangerous, he said without preamble. I stirred sugar into my latte, taking my time. And what do you think? I think. He rubbed his face with both hands. I think I don't know who you are anymore. That stung more than I expected. I'm the same person I've always been, Kenji. The person who's been taking your mother's abuse for 2 years while you stood by and watched. She wasn't abusing you. She was just particular. Traditional. Traditional? I set my cup down harder than necessary. Traditional would be treating your son's girlfriend with respect as a potential family member. Traditional would be teaching me your customs instead of mocking my attempts to learn them. What your mother was doing was bullying. He was quiet for a long moment. The stuff you said about suicide. Emma, that was really messed up. You're right. It was. I met his eyes. I shouldn't have brought up such dark historical practices just to make a point. But I'm not apologizing for finally standing up to her. She's been having nightmares, he said quietly. She keeps checking the locks on the doors. She thinks you might do something. I blinked. Do something? Like what? Like hurt her. Or. He swallowed hard. Or yourself. She's convinced you were threatening some kind of murder-suicide pact. The absurdity of it hit me like a slap. I started laughing, not the kind of laughter that means something's funny, but the kind that bubbles up when your brain can't process the sheer ridiculousness of a situation. Murder-suicide? I gasped between giggles. She thinks I'm going to kill her and then myself because she criticized my Chirashi Bowl presentation? It's not funny, Emma. Oh, but it is. I wiped tears from my eyes. It's hilarious. Your mother spent 2 years telling me I could never understand Japanese culture, and now she's so paranoid about my cultural knowledge that she can't sleep at night. Kenji didn't laugh. You scared her. She scared me first, I said, the laughter dying abruptly. Every single day for 2 years. She made me feel like I was nothing, like I didn't deserve to be with you, like I was some kind of cultural invader trying to steal her precious son. We sat in silence for a while. The coffee shop buzzed with conversations around us, normal people having normal relationship problems, probably. Not sitting across from each other discussing whether historical suicide references constituted terroristic threats. I think we need a break, Kenji said finally. I'd been expecting it, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. Because I finally fought back? Because I don't know how to fix this. My mother is terrified of my girlfriend, and my girlfriend is talking about ritual disembowelment at family dinners. This isn't normal, Emma. He was right. None of this was normal. Normal would have been him defending me from the beginning. Normal would have been his mother making an effort to welcome me into their family. Normal would have been me finding a mature way to address the conflict instead of weaponizing historical trauma practices. But we passed normal about 1.5 years ago. Fine, I said. A break it is. He looked relieved, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. Maybe after some time apart, we can figure out how to move forward. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We hugged awkwardly by our cars, and then he drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot wondering how my life had gotten so twisted. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've thrown myself into work, into my hobbies, into anything that doesn't leave room for thinking about Kenji or his mother or the mess I made of everything. I've been learning pottery, actual Japanese ceramics techniques, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. I've been reading more about Japanese history, but focusing on the positive aspects this time. Art, literature, philosophy. I've also been seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specializes in intercultural relationship dynamics. She's helped me understand that what happened with Akiko was a perfect storm of cultural misunderstanding, generational trauma, and good old-fashioned personality conflicts. Your response was disproportionate, she told me during our second session. But it came from a place of real pain. You'd been systematically excluded and belittled, and you finally reached your breaking point. I scared her, I said. I never meant to scare anyone. But you did mean to upset her. To shock her. To turn the tables on the power dynamic that had been hurting you. She was right. I had wanted to upset Akiko, to make her feel as small and unwelcome as she'd made me feel. Mission accomplished, I guess. The weird part is how much I've learned about myself through all this. I always thought I was the kind of person who avoided conflict, who bent over backward to keep the peace. Turns out, I'm also the kind of person who, when pushed far enough, will bring up ritual suicide at dinner parties. It's not my best look. But it's not my worst, either. Because buried under all the passive-aggressive historical references and cultural gatekeeping drama, there was a real point. I had worked hard to understand and appreciate Japanese culture. I had put in genuine effort to connect with Kenji's heritage, to become someone worthy of joining their family. Akiko never gave me credit for that. She was so invested in seeing me as an outsider that she couldn't recognize the respect I was trying to show. Dr. Martinez has been helping me practice better ways to address cultural conflicts. Role-playing scenarios where I advocate for myself without resorting to psychological warfare. Revolutionary concept, apparently. The goal isn't to win, she reminded me last week. It's to communicate your needs clearly and stand your ground without causing unnecessary harm. Easier said than done when you're dealing with someone who's determined to misunderstand you. But I'm working on it. I've also been learning more about intergenerational trauma in immigrant families. How first-generation immigrants sometimes develop hyperprotective attitudes about cultural purity as a way of maintaining connection to their homeland. How second-generation kids get caught between honoring their parents' wishes and building their own lives. It doesn't excuse Akiko's behavior, but it helps explain it. And honestly, I think she was scared of me long before I brought up Oyako Shinju. Not scared that I'd hurt her physically, scared that I represented everything she'd been fighting against her whole life. The dilution of tradition. The loss of cultural identity. The American girlfriend who might take her son away from Japanese values entirely. In her mind, I wasn't just dating Kenji. I was erasing him. The irony is that I was trying so hard to prove I could fit into their world that I lost sight of my own worth. I didn't need to become an expert in Japanese culture to deserve respect. I didn't need to master chopsticks or memorize historical practices or bow at the exact right angle. I just needed to be treated like a human being. But try explaining that to someone who sees you as a threat to everything they hold sacred. 2 days ago, I got an unexpected phone call. Emma? It's Hiroshi. Kenji's father. My heart started racing immediately. Is everything okay? Is Kenji hurt? No. He's fine. I was wondering if you might be available to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. I almost said no automatically. The last thing I needed was another uncomfortable conversation with a member of Kenji's family. But something in his tone made me pause. What's this about, Mr. Tanaka? I think we need to talk about what happened. About Akiko and you, and, he sighed. About things that should have been said a long time ago. We met the next day at the same coffee shop where Kenji had broken up with me. Apparently it was becoming my designated location for difficult family conversations. Hiroshi looked older than I remembered, more tired. He ordered green tea while I stuck with my usual latte. First, he said, I owe you an apology. I blinked. You do? I should have intervened sooner. I watched my wife treat you with disrespect, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. That was wrong. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I'd been bracing for another lecture about cultural sensitivity and appropriate dinner conversation. I don't understand, I said. Akiko. He paused, choosing his words carefully. My wife has been through things that shaped her view of outsiders. When she was young, her family faced discrimination from both Americans and other Japanese families. She learned to protect what was hers very fiercely. That doesn't excuse how she treated me. No, he agreed. It doesn't. But it might help you understand why she reacted so strongly to your research. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. About the suicide practices? You have to understand, Emma, those aren't just historical curiosities to families like ours. Akiko's great-grandfather died by seppuku during the war. Her grandmother spoke of family honor and death before dishonor as real possibilities, not academic concepts. The coffee cup felt suddenly heavy in my hands. I didn't know. How could you? We don't speak of such things openly. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But when you brought up Oyako Shinju, when you spoke of ritual suicide without look in your eyes. She saw her grandmother's desperation. She saw the face of someone who had been pushed beyond their breaking point. The room seemed to tilt slightly. She thought I was actually considering. She thought you were telling her you'd rather die than continue being humiliated by her. His voice was gentle but firm. In her mind, that made her responsible for your death. And in Japanese culture, that responsibility would extend to Kenji, to our entire family line. I set my cup down with shaking hands. I never meant. I was just trying to show her that I knew more about Japanese culture than she gave me credit for. I was trying to prove a point. I know that now. But in that moment, with your knowledge of such specific historical practices, with the way you looked at her when you spoke. He shook his head. She saw a young woman who had been driven to consider the most final form of protest. The weight of what I'd accidentally communicated hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just been passive-aggressive or culturally inappropriate. I'd inadvertently threatened suicide in the most psychologically traumatic way possible for someone with Akiko's family history. Oh my gosh, I whispered. I terrorized her. You scared her very badly, Hiroshi confirmed. But Emma, I need you to understand something else. The way she treated you is unacceptable. I should have stopped it long ago. I looked up at him through the blur of tears I was trying not to shed. Why didn't you? Because I'm a coward, he said simply. I've spent 35 years avoiding conflict with my wife. I told myself that her treatment of Kenji's girlfriends was just her way of protecting him. I didn't want to see how cruel she was being. And now? Now she can't sleep. She keeps asking if I think you're still alive, if we should call someone to check on you. She's convinced that her behavior pushed you towards something terrible, and she's drowning in guilt. I wiped my eyes with my napkin, trying to process everything he was telling me. What do you want from me, Mr. Tanaka? I want you to know that not all of us saw you as an enemy. I watched you try so hard to fit in, to learn our ways, to make Akiko proud. I was impressed by your dedication. But you never said anything? No. I didn't. And I'm sorrier about that than you'll ever know. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The coffee shop continued its normal rhythm around us, but I felt like I was suspended in a bubble of revelation and regret. Is she okay? I asked finally. Really? She's seeing someone. A counselor who specializes in cultural trauma. She's beginning to understand that her fears about losing Japanese identity made her act in ways that went against Japanese values of hospitality and respect. I almost smiled at that. Ironic. Barry. He studied my face. Are you okay, Emma? Really? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Was I okay after being pushed to the point where I'd weaponized historical suicide practices? Was I okay after losing the man I loved because I couldn't find a healthy way to stand up for myself? I'm working on it, I said honestly. I'm seeing someone too. Learning better ways to handle conflict. Good. That's good. He hesitated. Emma, I have something to ask you, and I understand if you say no. My stomach clenched. What? Akiko would like to apologize to you. In person. She wants to make amends for how she treated you, and she wants to express her regret for the cultural assumptions she made. I stared at him. She wants to see me? She's terrified, he admitted. But she feels it's necessary. For her own healing, and hopefully for yours. The idea of sitting across from Akiko again made my chest tight. But underneath the anxiety, there was something else. A small, stubborn part of me that wanted closure. That wanted to hear her acknowledge what she'd put me through. What about Kenji? I asked. Does he know you're here? This is between adults, Hiroshi said carefully. Whatever happens between you and Akiko doesn't need to affect your relationship with my son. Though I hope, someday, you two can find your way back to each other. I thought about Kenji, his laugh, his terrible cooking, the way he'd hold my hand during scary movies. The way he failed to defend me when it mattered most. I don't know if that's possible, I said. Perhaps not. But I believe you loved each other genuinely. That kind of connection doesn't disappear easily. He was right about that. Even angry and hurt as I was, I still missed Kenji every day. If I agree to see her, I said slowly, it has to be somewhere neutral. And I want you there too. Of course. Whatever makes you feel safe. Safe. When was the last time I'd felt truly safe around his family? Maybe never. Let me think about it, I said. I'll call you in a few days. Take all the time you need. We parted ways in the parking lot, and I drove home with my head spinning. The conversation had reframed everything I thought I understood about that terrible dinner, about Akiko's reaction, about my own behavior. I thought I was being cleverly vindictive, showing off my cultural knowledge to someone who'd underestimated me. But from Akiko's perspective, I'd been a young woman in crisis, pushed to the edge by her own cruelty, speaking the language of family death and ritual suicide. No wonder she couldn't sleep. That night, I called Dr. Martinez and left a voicemail asking for an emergency session. We met the next morning. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot of guilt right now, she observed after I'd explained everything Hiroshi had told me. I should be. I accidentally terrorized a woman who was already dealing with intergenerational trauma. I used her family's historical pain as a weapon against her. Did you know about her great-grandfather when you made those comments? No, but did you intend to reference her family's specific trauma? No, I just wanted to show her that. Emma. Dr. Martinez's voice was firm but kind. You can't be responsible for information you didn't have. Your intent was to shock her with your knowledge, yes. But you weren't trying to trigger her family's traumatic history. The impact is the same whether I meant it or not. The impact is important, absolutely. But so is intent. You're not a villain because you defended yourself in a way that accidentally hit a nerve you couldn't have known existed. I thought about that for a long moment. But I still hurt her? Yes. And it sounds like she hurt you for a very long time. Both of those things can be true. So what do I do now? What do you want to do? I considered the question seriously. What did I want? Revenge? Vindication? An apology? I want her to understand that I was never her enemy, I said finally. I want her to know that I genuinely tried to respect and learn about Japanese culture. I want her to acknowledge that she made me feel unwelcome and small for 2 years. And do you think meeting with her could accomplish those things? Maybe. If she's really ready to listen. And if she's not? I thought about Akiko's sleepless nights, her guilt, her fear that she'd driven me to consider suicide. Then at least she'll know I'm okay. That whatever damage we did to each other, it didn't push me over any final edges. Dr. Martinez nodded. That sounds like a compassionate reason to meet with her. Compassionate? Right, I laughed humorlessly. 2 months ago I was making jokes about ritual disembowelment. Now I'm being compassionate. People can change, Emma. Especially when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Like accidentally traumatizing your boyfriend's mother? Like standing up for yourself in an unhealthy dynamic and then taking responsibility for the fallout. I called Hiroshi that afternoon. I'll meet with her, I said. But I have conditions. Name them. Neutral location. You present. And I want to speak first. I need her to listen to my side before she starts apologizing. Agreed. When? This weekend. Saturday afternoon. That coffee shop again, it's becoming my designated crisis location anyway. He laughed softly at that. Thank you, Emma. This means more to our family than you know. Saturday arrived faster than I wanted. I spent the morning in therapy, working through my anxiety about seeing Akiko again. Dr. Martinez reminded me that I was in control of the conversation, that I could leave it at any time, that I didn't owe anyone forgiveness just because they asked for it. Remember, she said, healing isn't about going back to the way things were. It's about moving forward with better understanding. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, claiming a corner table where I could see the door. Hiroshi arrived next, looking nervous but determined. Akiko came in last, and I barely recognized her. She looked smaller somehow, older. Her usually perfect posture was slightly hunched, and her hands shook as she approached the table. When she saw me, her face crumpled with what looked like relief. Emma-san, she said, using the respectful suffix I'd never heard from her before. Thank you for coming. I nodded but didn't smile. Mrs. Tanaka. We all ordered drinks, tea for them, coffee for me. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I decided to break it. Before we start, I said, I need you both to understand something. I never, at any point, considered harming myself or anyone else. The historical practices I mentioned at dinner were intended to shock you, Mrs. Tanaka, not to threaten suicide. Akiko's eyes filled with tears. But the way you spoke of them, the knowledge you had. I study history. I read extensively about cultures I'm interested in. When someone tells me repeatedly that I can't understand or appreciate something, I tend to research it thoroughly. I kept my voice level, factual. I brought up those practices because I was angry and wanted to prove that I knew more about Japanese culture than you assumed. It was petty and inappropriate, but it wasn't a cry for help. I see that now, she whispered. But in that moment, you saw what your own guilt and fear projected onto my words. I turned to meet her eyes directly. Just like for 2 years, you saw what you wanted to see when you looked at me. An interloper. A threat. Someone who could never understand or respect your culture. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. But that's not who I was, I continued. I spent countless hours learning about Japanese history, art, philosophy, religion. I practiced calligraphy until my hands cramped. I studied tea ceremony principles and seasonal cooking techniques. I learned basic conversational Japanese so I could speak with your elderly neighbors when they visited. Tears were streaming down Akiko's face now, but I wasn't done. I did all of that because I loved your son, and I wanted to be worthy of joining your family. I wanted to honor your heritage and show respect for the culture that shaped the man I fell in love with. My voice cracked slightly. But no matter what I did, how hard I tried, you were determined to see me as an outsider. As someone who could never be enough. Emma-san. She started. I'm not finished. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I needed to say everything. You made me feel like I was stealing something from you just by existing in your son's life. You criticized my attempts to engage with Japanese culture, then acted like I was appropriating something that didn't belong to me. You created a lose-lose situation where I was either ignorant and disrespectful, or presumptuous and overreaching. Akiko was sobbing quietly now, but she maintained eye contact. That dinner, when I brought up Oyako Shinju and seppuku, that was me at my breaking point. That was what happens when someone who's trying desperately to prove their worth gets tired of being treated like they're inherently inadequate. I paused, letting that sink in. I'm not proud of how I handled it. But I'm not ashamed of finally standing up for myself, either. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentment and misunderstanding. Finally, Akiko spoke. You are right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About all of it. I was so afraid of losing my culture, of watching it disappear in American life, that I made you into enemy before I knew who you were. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue, wiping her eyes before continuing. My grandmother used to tell me stories about Japanese women who married American soldiers after the war. How they were rejected by both cultures, how their children grew up belonging nowhere. I was so terrified that Kenji would lose his Japanese identity if he chose American wife. I'm not trying to erase his Japanese heritage, I said. I was trying to learn about it. I know that now. But then I saw only threat. Young, beautiful American woman who could give him life I never could. Who could take him away from traditions I was struggling to maintain in foreign country. Hiroshi reached over and took his wife's hand. Tell her about your parents, Akiko. She nodded, still crying. My parents came here with nothing. They worked so hard to build life, but they lost so much of home in process. By time I was born, we spoke English at dinner table. We celebrated Christmas instead of proper New Year rituals. My mother forgot how to make traditional pickles that her mother taught her. I felt something shift in my chest, not quite forgiveness, but understanding. I swore I would not let that happen to my children, Akiko continued. I would preserve what my parents lost. But instead of teaching and sharing, I became guardian who pushed away anyone who might threaten what little I had left. Including people who genuinely wanted to learn, I said softly. Especially them. Her laugh was bitter. Because if you could learn our ways, if you could belong to our culture without being born into it, then what made my suffering special? What made my sacrifices meaningful? The honesty of that admission hit me like a wave. All this time, I'd thought Akiko's hostility was about cultural purity or simple prejudice. But it was really about her own sense of displacement, her fear that the identity she'd fought so hard to maintain could be adopted by others without the same cost. Mrs. Tanaka, I said, I never wanted to take anything away from you. I wanted to add to it. To become part of preserving and honoring Japanese culture in your family. I see that now. But when you spoke of death rituals, when you showed such specific knowledge of our darkest traditions. She shivered. I thought I had pushed you to place my grandmother went when discrimination became too much. To place where death seemed better than continued shame. I was never in that place, I assured her. Angry, yes. Frustrated and hurt, absolutely. But never suicidal, thank God, she whispered. I have not slept well since that night, worrying that I caused such pain. We sat in silence for a while, processing everything that had been said. Finally, I spoke. I forgive you, Mrs. Tanaka. For the way you treated me, for the assumptions you made, for making me feel unwelcome in your family. I paused. But I need you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I understand, she said quickly. I do not expect. I know I cannot undo harm I caused. What I need from you, I continued, is acknowledgement that I was never your enemy. That my interest in Japanese culture came from respect and love, not appropriation or conquest. Can you give me that? Yes, she said without hesitation. Emma-san, you showed more dedication to learning our ways than some of my own relatives. I was blind to your efforts because I was too afraid to see them. Something tight in my chest finally loosened. Thank you. And I need to ask forgiveness for frightening you so badly, I said. I should never have brought up those historical practices, regardless of my frustrations. I'm sorry for traumatizing you. You could not have known, she said. I never spoke of family history, never explained why such topics were particularly painful. You were defending yourself with knowledge you had gained through sincere study. I cannot blame you for not knowing secrets I had kept hidden. Hiroshi cleared his throat. There's something else we need to discuss. Both Akiko and I turned to look at him. Kenji, he said simply. My son has been miserable for weeks. He misses you terribly, Emma, but he doesn't know how to bridge the gap that's open between all of us. My heart clenched. How is he? Sad. Confused. Angry with himself for not handling the situation better. Hiroshi's expression was gentle. He knows he should have defended you sooner. He's been beating himself up about being a coward. Like father, like son, Akiko said quietly. We both failed to protect someone we should have cherished. I thought about Kenji, about the relationship we'd built and then lost in the space of a single dinner. About all the conversations we should have had but didn't, all the boundaries that should have been set but weren't. I don't know if we can fix what broke between us, I said honestly. Too much happened. Too much trust was damaged. Perhaps, Hiroshi acknowledged. But perhaps healing is possible if all parties are willing to do the work. What kind of work? I asked. Family counseling, Akiko said. All of us together, learning how to communicate better. Learning how to respect boundaries and address conflicts before they explode. I blinked. You'd be willing to do family therapy? If it means making amends for the pain I caused, yes. If it means possibly welcoming you back into our family properly this time, yes. She met my eyes. Emma-san, I would like chance to be mother-in-law you deserved from beginning. But only if you want that chance too. The offer hung in the air between us. A few months ago, I would have jumped at any sign of acceptance from Akiko. Now, older and hopefully wiser, I knew it wasn't that simple. I need time to think, I said. About therapy, about Kenji, about all of it. This conversation has been healing, but it's also been a lot to process. Of course, she said quickly. Take all time you need. We will wait. We finished our drinks in more comfortable silence, the tension that had defined our relationship for so long finally beginning to ease. As we prepared to leave, Akiko reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Emma-san, she said, thank you for giving foolish old woman chance to make things right. Thank you for being willing to try, I replied. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not fixed, not completely healed, but hopeful. For the first time since that terrible dinner, I could imagine a future where Kenji and I might find our way back to each other. Where Akiko and I might build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of fear and resentment. But first, I had to decide if I was ready to take that risk again. I spent the next week talking it through with Dr. Martinez, with my sister, with my best friend who'd watched the whole relationship unfold from the beginning. Everyone had opinions, but the decision had to be mine. The question isn't whether they've changed, Dr. Martinez pointed out during our session. The question is whether you're willing to enter a relationship with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. What do you mean? You went into your relationship with Kenji hoping to be accepted unconditionally by his family. That's a beautiful hope, but it set you up for disappointment when reality didn't match the fantasy. She was right. I'd wanted Akiko to love me like a daughter from day one, to welcome me with open arms and be proud of Kenji's choice. When that didn't happen, I tried harder and harder to earn something that was never really available. So what would realistic expectations look like? Respect. Civil treatment. Recognition that you're important to Kenji and deserve basic courtesy. But not necessarily immediate intimacy or unconditional acceptance. It sounded so simple when she put it like that. But implementing it would mean setting boundaries I'd never had the courage to establish before. And what about with Kenji? I asked. How do I trust him to stand up for me next time? You don't, she said bluntly. Trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time. If you choose to try again with him, it has to be with the understanding that he's still learning how to navigate these family dynamics too. 2 weeks after my coffee shop reconciliation with Akiko, I finally called Kenji. Emma? His voice was breathless, like he'd run to answer the phone. Hi, I said, suddenly nervous. Your dad told you about our conversation? Some of it. Are you okay? Such a loaded question. Was I okay? I was better than I'd been in months, but still processing trauma from a relationship that had pushed me to psychological warfare. I was hopeful about the future but realistic about how much work lay ahead. I'm working on it, I said. Are you? Not really. His honesty caught me off guard. I miss you so much it physically hurts sometimes. But I also know I messed up badly, and I don't know how to fix it. Maybe we can't fix it, I said softly. Maybe we have to build something new instead. What would that look like? I don't know yet. But it would have to include family counseling, clear boundaries, and you actually standing up for me when your mother crosses lines. Yes, he said immediately. Whatever it takes. Emma, I know I failed you. I was so used to avoiding conflict with my parents that I forgot my first loyalty should be to you. It wasn't just about loyalty, Kenji. It was about basic respect. About recognizing that I was trying so hard to fit into your family, and your silence made me feel like I was failing. You weren't failing. You were amazing. You learned more about Japanese culture in 2 years than some of my cousins know, and I never told you how much that meant to me. Hearing him acknowledge my efforts felt like a balm on wounds I'd been carrying for months. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I was taking it for granted, I guess. And because I was scared that if I made a big deal about defending you, it would make the conflict with my mother worse. So you let me take all the heat instead? Yes. His voice was heavy with shame. I threw you under the bus to keep peace with my family, and it was the most cowardly thing I've ever done. We talked for 2 hours that night. About his childhood, about the pressure he felt to be the perfect Japanese-American son. About my own struggles with feeling like I had to prove myself worthy of love. About all the conversations we should have had before everything exploded. By the end of the call, we'd agreed to try couples counseling together, with the understanding that we were starting over rather than picking up where we left off. I love you, he said before we hung up. I never stopped loving you, even when everything was falling apart. I love you too, I admitted. But love isn't enough, Kenji. We need to do better. I know. We will. Our first counseling session was awkward as heck. Dr. Chen, our couples therapist, didn't let us get away with glossing over the hard stuff. Emma, you used your knowledge of Japanese culture as a weapon against Kenji's mother. That's a form of emotional manipulation, regardless of how justified your anger was. I squirmed in my chair. I know that. And Kenji, you abandoned your partner when she needed your support most. You prioritized your comfort over her well-being. I know that too, he said miserably. Good. Now that we've established that you both made serious mistakes, let's talk about how to prevent them in the future. Over the following weeks, we developed communication strategies, conflict resolution techniques, and clear boundaries for family interactions. I learned how to express frustration without resorting to psychological warfare. Kenji learned how to advocate for our relationship without destroying his family connections. Most importantly, we both learned how to apologize without deflecting responsibility. The family counseling sessions with Akiko and Hiroshi were even more intense. Akiko had to confront the ways her own trauma had shaped her treatment of me. I had to acknowledge how my research into dark historical practices had triggered her family's specific pain points. Cultural appreciation, Dr. Chen explained, means understanding not just the positive aspects of a culture, but also being sensitive to historical traumas and generational pain. So I shouldn't have studied those topics? I asked. You should have studied them. But when you chose to weaponize that knowledge, you crossed from appreciation into exploitation. It was a hard truth to swallow, but necessary. Akiko, meanwhile, had to learn the difference between cultural preservation and cultural gatekeeping. Your fear of losing Japanese identity led you to reject someone who was genuinely trying to honor and learn about Japanese culture, Dr. Chen told her. You became the barrier to cultural continuation that you were trying to prevent. Slowly, painfully, we all began to heal. Akiko started teaching me traditional recipes, not as tests to pass but as skills to share. She showed me photos of her grandmother, explained the historical context of various practices, helped me understand the emotional weight behind cultural traditions. In return, I shared my research with her, not as weapons this time, but as bridges to deeper understanding. We discovered we were both fascinated by Heian period poetry. We both loved the philosophical aspects of tea ceremony. We both struggled with maintaining tradition in modern American life. Kenji, meanwhile, stepped fully into his role as my partner and advocate. When his uncle made a dismissive comment about American girlfriends who try too hard at a family gathering, Kenji immediately shut it down. Emma is family, he said firmly. She deserves the same respect you'd show any family member. And frankly, her knowledge of our culture puts most of us to shame. The uncle apologized. To me. Directly. It was a small moment, but it felt revolutionary. 6 months after that terrible dinner, Kenji and I moved in together. Not because everything was perfect, but because we'd learned how to fight fear and support each other through difficulties. Akiko helped us choose furniture, insisting we needed proper zabuton cushions for traditional floor seating. She brought us a housewarming gift, a beautiful ceramic tea set that had belonged to her grandmother. For your tea ceremonies, she said, smiling genuinely for the first time since I'd known her. I hope you will invite me to join sometimes. I'd love that, I said, meaning it completely. That evening, as Kenji and I sat on our new cushions, drinking tea from our new ceramic cups, I reflected on how far we'd all come. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't brought up those historical practices that night? I asked. Kenji considered the question. Honestly? I think we would have broken up eventually anyway. The underlying problems would have just festered longer. He was probably right. The cultural tensions, the communication failures, the lack of boundaries, none of that would have resolved itself without the crisis that forced us all to confront our issues. So you're saying my passive-aggressive historical lecture saved our relationship? I'm saying your refusal to keep taking abuse, even though you handled it poorly, forced all of us to deal with problems we've been avoiding. That's a very charitable interpretation. It's an honest one. He set down his teacup and turned to face me fully. Emma, you scared my mother that night. But you also showed her that her behavior had real consequences. That she couldn't keep treating you badly without eventually pushing you to a breaking point. I still feel guilty about traumatizing her. And you should. But she feels guilty about traumatizing you for 2 years. You're even. We weren't even, not really. The scales of hurt and healing would probably never balance perfectly. But we were all trying to do better, to be better, to build relationships based on honesty instead of fear. A year later, Kenji proposed. Not with a traditional diamond ring, but with a handmade ceramic piece he'd created in a pottery class, a small and perfect bowl that somehow captured everything we'd been through together. It's not much to look at, he said, kneeling in our living room. But it's made with my own hands, and it's strong enough to hold whatever we pour into it. I said yes, obviously. Akiko cried when we told her, but they were happy tears. She immediately began planning traditional elements to incorporate into our wedding ceremony, consulting me every step of the way. We must have proper sake ceremony, she said excitedly. And I will teach you to fold origami cranes for decorations. Oh, and my sister can help with kimono selection if you are interested. Mrs. Tanaka, I said, using the formal address that had become affectionate rather than distant. I would love all of that. Akiko, she corrected gently. You call me Akiko now. Or better yet, Okasan. Mother. The word hit me like a physical embrace. After everything we'd been through, all the hurt and healing and hard-won understanding, she was offering me the one thing I'd wanted from the beginning, true acceptance into her family. Okasan, I said, testing the word. It felt strange and wonderful on my tongue. She beamed, and in that moment, I saw the mother-in-law I'd always hoped for. Not perfect, not without her own struggles and traumas, but willing to love me despite my imperfections and cultural differences. Our wedding was beautiful. Traditional Japanese elements blended seamlessly with my own family's customs. Akiko wore a stunning formal kimono and spent the entire day making sure I felt honored and celebrated. My own mother, initially worried about cultural appropriation, ended up bonding with Akiko over their shared desire to see their children happy. During the sake ceremony, as Kenji and I drank from the same cup in the ritual that would bind our families together, I caught Akiko's eye across the room. She smiled and nodded slightly, a gesture of approval I'd waited 3 years to receive. Later, during the reception, she pulled me aside. Emma-chan, she said, using the diminutive suffix with warmth instead of condescension. I have something for you. She handed me a small wrap package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny origami crane. This belonged to my grandmother, she said. The one I told you about, who struggled so much with American life. She would have loved you, I think. Your dedication to learning, your respect for tradition. I put the bracelet on with shaking hands. Thank you, Okasan. This means everything to me. You are my daughter now, she said simply. My real daughter, chosen by love instead of blood. As I write this, Kenji and I have been married for 2 years. We're not perfect, we still have disagreements, still struggle sometimes with cultural differences and family dynamics. But we've learned how to address conflicts before they explode into psychological warfare. Akiko and I have become genuine friends. She teaches me traditional crafts and recipes. I share my historical research and help her understand American cultural context she finds confusing. We laugh together, cry together, and occasionally gang up on Kenji when he's being ridiculous. Last month, she asked me to help her write a letter to her own grandmother's spirit, apologizing for the ways fear had made her reject connection instead of fostering it. I think she would be proud of us, Akiko said after we'd finished the letter together. Proud that we found a way to honor tradition while still growing and changing. I think she's right. The funny thing about cultural appreciation is that it was never really about proving I could master Japanese customs or memorize historical facts. It was about building bridges between different worlds, finding common ground across divides that seemed insurmountable. I still study Japanese history, but now I approach it with more sensitivity to the emotional weight of traumatic events. I still practice traditional arts, but I do it for joy rather than to prove my worthiness. And yes, I still know way too much about historical suicide practices. But these days, I use that knowledge for academic papers rather than dinner table warfare. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled that terrible night differently. If I'd found a way to address Akiko's treatment of me without triggering her deepest fears. If I'd been more mature, more diplomatic, more careful with cultural sensitivities I didn't fully understand. But then I remembered Dr. Martinez's words, healing isn't about going back to the way things were. It's about moving forward with better understanding. We couldn't have built the relationships we have now without first destroying the unhealthy patterns we'd all fallen into. Sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt stronger. My relationship with Kenji's family isn't the fairy tale acceptance I originally dreamed of. It's something better, real, earned, tested by conflict and strengthened by mutual effort. We know we can hurt each other, which makes us more careful with each other's hearts. And in the end, isn't that what real family is? People who choose to keep loving each other despite knowing exactly how much damage you're all capable of inflicting? Akiko was right about one thing: Japanese family values do run deep. Deeper than I understood when I was trying so hard to prove I could appreciate them. But what I've learned is that the most important values, respect, loyalty, forgiveness, the willingness to grow and change for love, aren't limited by culture or blood. They're human values. And once we stopped fighting about who deserved to claim them, we finally learned how to live them. These days, when people ask me about marrying into a traditional Japanese family, I tell them the truth: it's complicated, rewarding, occasionally terrifying, and absolutely worth the effort if everyone involved is willing to do the work. But I also warn them about dinner table conversations. Sometimes the most innocent comments can accidentally trigger historical trauma, and sometimes defending yourself requires more cultural sensitivity than you realize you need. And if all else fails, maybe stick to discussing the weather instead of ritual suicide practices. Trust me on that one.